I don't like the listener to miss the best part of the conversation.
Best part always happens before hitting record. So you've solved for that.
I have solved for that. I really thank you. I really appreciate that. The only thing they missed was me asking if my dog was being too loud because he was licking something. My dog, want to hear a really thing about my dog? When I adopted him, the foster mom said, he's a really messy drinker. And I said, me too, Mary. Me
It's funny.
too.
When I adopted mine, I thought I was special because I thought it was like a meet and greet. They didn't say that I was just going to be keeping him, but
That's what they say, a
they
home
totally,
visit. And then they're
yeah,
like, bye.
they totally played me. And the woman knocks on my door and she's holding this like tiny, adorable little pit feist mix. And he's just the cutest thing ever. And she just hands him off to me and he starts kissing me. It's like uncontrollably. I'm like, oh my God, it's love at first sight. And it turns out he does that to everybody he meets.
We need sales tactics like that in our job, because that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is trying to sell the long game to people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, Mike Millner. I fell in love with Mike Millner when I was on his pod, and I was like, we need you over here, please. And so I love when that happens. Happens rarely. So can you tell us all about you? Like, why am I so obsessed with you?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Good question, Molly. Maybe it's your podcast.
So I will start with the fact that I currently run a nutrition coaching company, and the path to get here was very windy and had many kind of pit stops along the way. I grew up as an athlete, and I was exposed at a very young age to eating disorders, diet culture. I always remember my mom being on a diet or counting points. My oldest sister almost lost her life to anorexia. I have another sister who had significant disordered eating tendencies and body image issues. And I was like, well, I'm an athlete. I have a great metabolism. I can eat whatever I want. And I'm the lucky one who never has to deal with this stuff until I did. And that happened for me at right around senior year of college, right after organized sports was over. And I had picked up a lot of typical college kid habits, like eating a lot and drinking a lot and not really paying attention to my health. And woke up one day and looked in the mirror and I was like, I actually don't recognize myself, and was significantly overweight. And for me, that felt like this internal conflict because I had identified as an athlete my whole life. And so I'm pretty introverted. I don't make a lot of new friends very easily. So for me, it was like that was my conduit to being social, to being accepted, to my whole life's worth. It was like, this is my in. And now I don't have that anymore because I don't look the part. And I was afraid to get back on a basketball court. I was afraid to get back on a tennis court. What are people going to say when they see me? And I was imagining all of these questions. How did you let this happen? What, tell me the story. How did you go from, this athletic person to this significantly overweight? And just for context, I had been like maybe 160, 170 throughout high school and college, and then was like 260 at my heaviest. And
what's the time frame of the 160 to 270?
It's funny because it felt like it happened overnight. It truly felt like I woke up one day and it was just, I'm 100 pounds heavier. It was,
I relate.
it was probably gradually from like junior year, senior year of college, and then really the year after I graduated and the year after that. So like that time frame, I would say, was when most of it happened. And that led me down a path of chronic dieting, of having all the same issues that I thought I was avoiding, that I witnessed in my family. Restricting calories, 1,200 calorie meal plans, doing hours of cardio every day. Even though I hated cardio, I would lose 100 pounds. I would gain weight back. I would have these crazy like benchmark goals for myself. It was never good enough. I would get below 200 because I thought that was the magic number, and I would keep pushing it further. And even when I was at my leanest, I was like 160 pounds, and I look at a picture, and it's funny because I don't have very many pictures of myself at that weight. I have more pictures of myself being significantly overweight than I do at that very underweight, lean physique that I had. And I just hated my body. I would like pick it apart in the mirror and I would say awful things to myself. And it was never going to be the answer. I was never going to find fulfillment through hating my body lean or hating myself lean. And I developed orthorexia. I had major
Can you
body
just
image
say
issues.
what orthorexia is for those who are listening?
Yeah, so I was overly obsessed with clean eating and was fearful of any food that was not considered clean by my own standard. So it was all about, I would be that person at a restaurant and I would order, a salad, but like no dressing, no cheese, no croutons. How are you cooking the chicken? Because I don't want it cooked in, and just, that type of person. Couldn't be social. I remember times where my friends would want to go out and grab some drinks and hang out. And I would say, no, I can't. I'm sick. I don't feel well, just so I could eat my chicken and broccoli out of my little Tupperware at home.
Yeah.
And that was my life. And it drove, I was married at the time. We're since divorced. It drove a serious wedge in my relationship. Was a huge catalyst for just the divide. I mean, I didn't want to be around myself. I don't blame
Right.
her for not wanting to be around me. And I'll try to keep this
Oh
short.
no, we're fascinated. I promise we're fascinated.
Ultimately, I was like, there has to be something that I'm missing. I'm a relatively smart individual. I know I can figure this out. I
But
know
did you know you were miserable when you were in that orthorexia diet culture thing? Did you know you were miserable, or was like the drink having a drink?
it was like I didn't know I was miserable. I just felt like I was looking for the answer out there and not in here. It was like, if my body looks a certain way, if I'm lean enough, if I'm small enough, if I'm fit enough, then all of a sudden I'll be happy again.
Right.
But I was at the same time skipping out on all the things that actually
Sure.
made me happy.
You were miserable. you,
Miserable.
you hit the thing and you were miserable.
Right.
Right.
So it was, oftentimes we just have to have that awareness moment where it's
Mhm.
like, what am I actually doing?
Hmm.
What am I chasing? What is it for? What does this mean? Why am I on this journey to begin with? And that was really when I started to turn things around. And I do have a very extreme, I'll say I have extreme tendencies. Like when I get into something, I get really into it. So I did swing the pendulum hard in the other direction, going from like severe restriction to like, if it fits your macros, I'm going to eat cookies and donuts and get lean that way. And look at all these foods that I can enjoy while I'm still getting fit. And
Mm.
even though like my digestion was a mess and I had like brain fog and fatigue all the time, but it doesn't matter because it fit my macros. It quote unquote works.
What does fit your macros mean?
So basically, when you have targets for macronutrients, it's protein, carbs, fats. You're trying to hit a total calorie amount.
Oh, so it's like calorie counting.
Calorie. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh
So
yeah.
like
Oh
there's
my gosh.
yeah,
I could no go. I'm like your mom. You give me 12 points. Oh my God. You give me 12 points plus unlimiteds. Count me in.
exactly.
But it's
Yeah.
so obsessive. So obsessive.
Yeah. So it's just taking calories and breaking it down to the
Oh,
3 macros and trying to hit these targets. And there's all sorts of coaching programs and apps that will spit out numbers at you. And I was just following along and I was like, well, I can, because I have all these carbs to work with, I can fill my carbs with donuts and Rice Krispie treats and Pop Tarts and whatever else.
welcome home, man. Yeah. Welcome home. Yeah. So get that. Totally. Yeah.
So
And
that
so
was
you're still not happy, it sounds like, after that.
no, I looked better on the outside. Internally, I felt like crap. I was always bloated. I always felt heavier than I was. I had fatigue. My thoughts weren't very
Mm.
clear, and I felt like my brain wasn't working the way that it should. And then I finally started to figure some things out for myself, and I dove heavy into just like education around human metabolism and human behavior.
Mm.
And I got a job as a nutrition coach, which I thought, because crawling out of that dark space that I was in, like a lot of people in our industry, like we have the journey ourselves and we're
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't want anyone to make
Ever.
all of those mistakes that I made. So
Right.
I'm gonna pay it forward. I'm gonna help people. I'm gonna be this person that's like, I'm gonna help you avoid all the stupid things that I did. And that was my thought process. I had no idea that I could actually have a career as a nutrition coach, but I found this company and I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And I got in as like an intern and I worked my way up as like their head nutrition coach. And I recognized that it was really not coaching at all. And when I saw what was happening with clients, it was a lot of disordered eating, and it was a lot of blaming and shaming. And if you're not following the plan, you don't want it bad enough, and it's your
Oh.
fault. Do it better. And when I, and it was very automated, like it wasn't real coaching. Everything was like kind of an algorithm that was like,
Mm.
if this happens, then we send them this thing. And even like the coach's response. So the customer, the client thought they were getting a message from the coach, but really it was like we would just click a button and it would like populate a message and then it would send
Wow.
it off. So it was like very automated and pretty deceitful, which obviously did not sit well with me for somebody that has morals and values.
And
And
experience, right? Being scarred by a, a machine, right?
exactly. And the craziest thing was when I started actually talking to people that were working with that company and having just like side conversation, like, let's just chat. Tell me what's really going on. Most of their struggles had nothing to do with food. And it was all about stress and anxiety and emotions and eating out of boredom and coping with trauma through food, all these different things that I was like, this whole game is a psychology game that we're trying to make a physiological game. Like it's not about your macros, it's not about your calories. It's about what's happening in your brain and your mind and your internal belief system and the things that you're telling yourself. And it was just like a whole paradigm shattering moment for me of being like, okay, I think I understand how we actually transform and how we actually change our behaviors and become the future version of ourselves that we desire. And I had a very ugly falling out with that company and then started my own business. And I've had my business for almost 5 years now and have
Wow.
learned a lot through that process as well. But it's nice to be able to do things the way that I believe is morally the way that we should be doing them.
To say the least. I have like 100 questions. Like, because I have to say, in my experience, I've had a very wonderful relationship treating cis men. And that story is so common. So I really didn't care that I want you to talk forever. I have so many more questions about it because I think what appears as, I can eat what I want and I run it, it's really exercise bulimia in its own way. And I think it happens to a lot of people and a lot of athletes where it's like, well, I didn't ever have to learn that. And so I didn't. And here I am. And now I really have like an eating disorder. When you say like, then I really hear that shame part, like of not wanting to see people. That's a real highlight of my story. And even in like the repairs of my history, it's like I try to show up to everything now because I was so absent for so many years of my own self-hate. Like, how did the weight gain happen? Do you know?
Yeah, I was sitting on my ass and not moving and eating a bunch of fast food and
Was it like depression though? Do you think there was like that part of it? Do you think it was emotional?
it was I definitely did not take advantage of college for what it's intended to be there for. I fell in love with learning much later in life.
Mhm.
And now I'm like, man, put me back. I'll go to every
Me
class
too.
just to learn. Like I'll take anything. It doesn't matter. I just want to learn.
Totally.
And when I was in college, I was totally like, I'm gonna skip class. I'm just here to party. I'm whatever. And that was my lifestyle at that point. I was still active, so I was still on like playing basketball in like a flag football league, doing soccer, things like that. But then it was drinking a lot and late night drive-throughs and
Right.
just typical habits of a college kid. And truly
Hmm.
the only time that I was on my feet. And then I would be just
You
sitting.
just froze. Can you just start again from the top of that?
I'm
You
sorry, which
said you froze, so it just said, I think you would say, but truly the only time.
oh, the only time that I was on my feet was when I was at work bartending. And then I would just be sitting on the couch watching TV and drinking and eating crap food. And that was it. It was rinse and repeat. And
Wow.
that was kind of the process that led to all that weight gain.
Wow. I have two more questions about your personal story, I think. Because you know what? I think there's so much to learn from our stories. I think they're powerful. I mean, of course, you're explaining like the embedded diet culture of your family and the embedded diet culture that we just like, breathe. But like, how did you get so orthorexic? Like what happened inside it when you decided, okay, I need to stop this? Did you just decide like, oh, I'm going to go hard paleo, or, oh, I'm going to like, how did you make this decision to get so in the initial part? Of course, it sucks you in. It's an addiction. Don't get me, it's my second book, but like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it was actually at a gym. I started going to this gym, and the owner he like sat us down. I remember this day. It was like our orientation. And I remember I almost didn't walk in because at that point I was like pretty overweight, and I had gained and lost and gained and lost, and like I was on this cycle, this back and forth. And everything that I had tried up until that point was truly just like a meal plan. Like I have a funny story about when I purchased this cardio machine that was called a stair climber, and like
Yeah.
I was like so susceptible to all of these like TV ads that were like, you're going to burn 37 times more calories on this machine than you do a regular treadmill. I'm like, oh my God, sign me up.
Right. How much do you want? Right.
So I like I bought this thing, like stuck it in my apartment that like took up the whole living room. And I would do it for like 2 hours a day. I would hate every minute of it. But in the manual, in the very back of the manual, there was a meal plan. And it was like, if you want to lose weight, follow this meal plan. And it could not have been more than 1,200 calories. And the other thing they said was like, you have to drink freezing cold water all throughout the day. And it has to be freezing cold because that speeds up your metabolism. So you'll lose even more weight. And I'm like, I'm
Yeah. You're like,
vulnerable. I'm in this
great.
like emotional state of just
Right.
fix me. And
Wow.
so a lot of the stuff that I had tried up until that point, of course, I lost a ton of weight and then immediately gained it back. And so I went to this gym, and the owner like totally hooked me in this orientation. I remember looking in the window of the door, and there's like all these fit people there. And I'm like, I don't know if I belong here. And I was like hesitant. And then I opened the door. The head trainer comes, like greets me, super friendly. We
Mm.
have this orientation, and he sits us all down. And the owner's like a lot of you have been going about this all wrong. And I'm like,
Me
tell me
too. I'm
more.
like, count me in. What am
Yeah.
I doing? Right.
Like, what you want to do is you want to build muscle and you want to look better naked. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And I was like, awesome. So
Mhm.
he's like talking about the benefits of building muscle. He's like, our programming is all about building strength and building muscle. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to shape your body the way that you want it to. So that way you lose body fat and you're not going to just get skinny fat. And he was saying all these things that made sense to me. And then he was like, all right, we have this challenge. And funny enough, as we're recording this, the challenge was like a new year, new you
Yeah.
challenge.
Of course it
So
was. What else would it be?
in that challenge, he gave a list of foods that were good and foods that were bad.
Mm.
And at that point, I had just, was like, all right, this is what I have to do. I just jumped in full. Like I told you, when I get into things, I get really into things. So I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I have to follow it to the T. Like everything has to be perfect. And I remember going to the grocery store, and I had my lists, and I'm looking, and I'm like, all right, this will be cool. Like I can get some fruits and veggies that I like. And I remember really enjoying apples as a kid, and then like I would snack on carrots at times. So I was like, all right, I'm going to look for some apples, I'm going to look for some carrots, and then I look at my list and they're on the bad list.
Oh my
Like,
goodness.
crap, I'm like, I can't believe all this time I thought these were healthy foods and they're
You're
not.
so vulnerable. Like, I just know this part of the story from it's like we're the most vulnerable in this
Okay.
moment because you're fine because you're all in. Now you're
Totally.
like, oh my God, I can't eat apples anymore.
Exactly. So the way that it was set up, it was like basically you fast until like noon, and then you can have a protein, which is like eggs, and you can have like broccoli, and then you can have a different protein for lunch, like chicken or
Right.
wild salmon or whatever, and you can have like more broccoli. And then the best part was like, if you lift weights, if you train that day, then you can have fruit, but it has to be berries. So
Oh,
it can't be
Lord.
apples, can't be
Oh,
pears,
this
can't
is
be
how
orange.
an eating disorder is made. I've been doing this 20 years. You are telling the story of how an eating. It makes me want to cry.
So that was it. And it worked,
And you
right? I
lost the
got
weight.
lost
Right.
some weight. And because I was pretty new to actual strength training at the time, like my physique, my body did change.
Wow.
And, I had those like newbie gains when you first get into strength training. So my body composition changed. And I was like, this is my like golden ticket. That was around the time where people start
Your
validating.
golden handcuff, Mike, like.
So I see people who are like, oh, like
Wait,
I
he
know,
just went out again. I see people who are like, I'm like compelled by the story. I see people who are like,
but like, dude, look at your arms. What are you doing? You look great. And then like that's just like confirms like I found it. I've got the golden ticket. Like I know how it all works now. You lift weights and you
and you
eat
eat
these
nothing.
foods on this list. And that was it. So I was like, orthorexia, I have to follow the foods on this list.
And the bad food. I mean, the story about the apples is the whole story, right? And I don't know, for me, like I actually wrote this in my book, but I had a quick moment where actually when I, had bariatric surgery, I lost a ton of weight. And when I started to gain it back, it was just like, the only thing worse than losing weight is gaining it back. It's like a different kind of shame. And so the holding on to that orthorexia like makes all the sense in the world, which is like, well, I can't lose this body and I can't lose my gym. And I mean, you have a community there too. Those gyms are serious. I've never been to one. I'm too scared personally, but maybe that's our next podcast. So one more question, which I think is maybe the most important, and I just want to say, like, God, we are so vulnerable when we make change. It's so important. And this is really what I want to talk about. It's so important that we are thoughtful and selective about who we give our power to, and who we allow to be our guides. I'd
Yeah,
choose you.
I've
So
noticed that people who just, because I've encountered, and I don't think that the guy who runs the gym, I still know him. He's not a bad person. I don't think that he knew any better. I think he was just following a program that was passed down from somewhere. I don't think that it was truly like malicious.
no,
And then the guy that ran the company that I used to work for as a nutrition coach, he is, I'll just say he's a full blown narcissist. So that's a different story. But
here we are.
what I found is that the people that can just stand up there and speak with absolute confidence and certainty, it is so appealing, whatever it is that
Well,
they're
it's so appealing when you're desperate, of
saying.
course, like it's not appealing like you. When I listen now, I'd be like, no, thanks, you're shady. But if, I have 100 pounds on me and you're saying, your body be cut and then your body got cut, like forget it. That is how you breed. And then you have some of the genes in you that really will breed out eating disorder. So I'm missing a part of the story that I think is the most important part of the story, which is this moment of grace. Like, what happens that moves you into this like middle path, even where you did decide you should go to get nutrition coaching? You did. I've just been an eating disorders therapist a long time, and you really don't get rid of orthorexia. I mean, this is a miracle story in and of itself. So, like, how did that? I mean, I understand your life was the size of a postage stamp, but it's a disease that tells you don't have a disease. And what made you decide to go to a more loving way of treating yourself?
Yeah, I wish that there was a moment that I could pinpoint that said it all turned around for me here. I think it was a culmination of just being sick and tired of the way that I was feeling and the life that I was living. And
Even though you were in an ideal body.
yeah,
That's
because
fascinating.
even with that, I wasn't able to sustain it very easily. And I still had this really, even when I started training other people and I started coaching other people, it was, to me at that point, it was still so physically driven. It was like, I understand energy balance. I understand human metabolism. I understand this physical game that we're playing. And it was just witnessing the people at the gym going through the same stuff that I was going through, noticing this, the way that they were talking about themselves, the way that they were joining these challenges that I was joining, and then jumping into the next one because they gained all the weight back in between challenges. And it was, I think if I had to pinpoint, it was probably recognizing myself and all of the other people that I was surrounded by at the gym, in that community, seeing that these are real issues, and then having kind of that, oh shit moment. These are my issues too.
And
So
then
I
you
don't,
acted on it.
and
No, that's
and it was very gradual. It wasn't like everything changed at once. It was a slow progression. And I will say that one of the most pivotal decisions that I made was to work with a real coach that
Mm,
knows how to coach humans and not just calories and not just physical transformation, but actually got to know me as a person and as a human and had conversations with me about more than just what I was eating and how I was training.
interesting. And what did you get? And then how did that impact how you do the work now? Like, what are your big takeaways as a coach? Like,
It was
what do you abide by?
it's really like the process of behavior change and transformation. It is the food part becomes so easy if we can address the mental part first.
Mhm.
And that's really like the foundation. I call it a top down approach. Like, let's start
Unpack it for me.
like,
I
what are
love
we
a
doing?
top-down approach,
Like,
you know that.
what's happening up here? What do you believe about yourself? What is your internal operating system? We all have this I am statement that we've developed from childhood that tells us what we think about ourselves, and oftentimes we don't even know where it came from. Sometimes it's not even our own voice. That
Mhm.
voice was a parent or a teacher, a coach or somebody, and we made it an internal voice that I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, whatever it may be. It's like, where did that come from? And is there actually evidence to support that?
What's yours? I know what one of mine is. What's yours? What's one of yours? Or
Mine,
was?
I'll never be good enough. That was a big one for me.
Huh. Where did you
because
learn it?
because I was my coping mechanism. I was like the first boy in my family for so many years. So, and I was the youngest. So,
Right.
being the youngest, being the only boy, being like, an athlete and successful at all these things. And like, there was just pressure to
Mhm.
always live up to this expectation. And so, my coping mechanism was kind of like, well, I'm going to let you down
Yeah,
early.
sabotage,
So,
sure.
yeah, I'm going to sabotage before,
Sure.
let's just get this out of the way so that you stop with these expectations. So it's
Sure.
always like, I'm never going to be good enough. And that was the dialogue.
Isn't it wonderful? Like I had this horse trainer when I rode horses and I was like one of the chunkier was. I mean, at the time, if I saw a picture of that little girl, I'd be like, honey, you're great. But she would say, people like you and me, Molly, we need to work twice as hard to be half as good. And that got so embedded into my soul that I think I had the same response. Like, I can't be twice as good. So I guess here we are,
Yeah. Yeah.
past the Cheetos,
Yeah.
because it fueled a lot of my binge eating personally, all that stuff. Just the sabotage of with the food is what I would do.
Yeah. And I think that that's where we have to start. And then the other thing that people are so afraid to do is identify what they actually want.
Mm,
And once you define success for yourself, it's really scary because you also define failure,
mm,
because two sides of the same coin. Once I know what I want and I define what success looks like, well, then anything that's not that and I don't get it, and then I feel like a failure.
mm. When
So,
you're talking about success with people, though, are you talking about like if they're like, well, I need to weigh 112 pounds? Like,
yeah,
is
why?
that
What
a
does that
why?
mean? Yeah. Like, we gotta peel the layers back. We have to know
You're like, that's too
what
simple. No.
you actually want. Well, the easy litmus test is, okay, great. I'm gonna snap my fingers and I'm gonna make you 112 pounds, but you can never see your kids again. You taking that deal? And they're like, well, of course not. Like, oh,
Right.
interesting. So is it really about the weight? Is there something else? Like, what do you actually want out of your life? Like, what do you want?
Mm,
Is it more family time? Is it you want to, be healthy because you want to live longer to be there for your kids? Like, we're talking
right.
about something so different than
Yeah.
just a number on the scale.
Yeah, drilling down a why is so important. I think it's fascinating. I love this part of your story. Like, I actually think it's super fascinating that the most miserable you were was at your like externally best.
Oh, for sure.
It's hard. Like, I always bring 325-pound angry Molly to the podcast because if I didn't, I wouldn't be doing my job. And she's like, yeah, well, it would be fine. Just let me weigh two. Like she's like, I don't care. Just can you just let me weigh that? But I know that to be true too. Like there was a part even in my recovery where I got super restrictive and I remember my best friend was pregnant with my godson and I went to dinner and I ate and she looked at me and she was like, have not been here until you just put like that sushi in your mouth. Like you have to deal with this because I had gotten good at restricting for the first time in my whole life. And it's all so addictive and it takes us away from everything.
Yeah. The things that we actually want to be doing. That's why I think defining those things is really important, because then you can see if somebody had sat me down, I don't know if it would have made a difference at that time, because sometimes we're just not ready to hear it. But if I had gone, I'm a big believer in therapy. I do therapy right now and absolutely love
That's
it.
me. I just started again too. I
Yeah,
left that therapy office. I was like, this is great. I'm a therapist by trade. I was
yeah,
like, this therapy really works.
yeah. But if I think somebody like asked me those questions about what brings me joy in life,
Mm,
and it was like family and friends and experiences and travel and literally all the things that I was checking out on, like all the things that I was
mm.
shutting down so that I could sit there with my little meals and
Chicken and broccoli.
chicken and
Mhm.
broccoli. I would,
Shitty God. Chicken and broccoli is a shitty God. That's what I say about the scale. Scale's a shitty God. I think chicken and broccoli is arguably a worse God. It's a
yeah,
sad little God, isn't it? I know exactly what you're talking about. Little pre-packaged, and I can only have this much. And your body's like, I'm really still hungry. And you're like, no, you're not, the whole thing. What a mess.
yeah,
So now you're a coach. Lucky us. Lucky us. And you and I, well, we relate on a lot of things, but one of the things you and I relate on is the long game. Talk me through it. How do you sell it? Such a hard sell. You're
sure,
the guy who owns the gym is such an easy sell. I'm 13 years into this thing and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I will go to the gym down the street.
yeah,
It is January. They probably have a good deal coming up. It's
yeah,
so intriguing, even how that goes, that intermittent reinforcement of the big get.
yeah. I think the challenge that we have is, to your point, this number one, when we're trying to make a change and we're uncomfortable and we're in this really emotional and vulnerable state, that promise of instant gratification is so appealing.
Oh,
And let's also remember that we're dealing with brilliant marketers, and the
brilliant.
diet industry is an $80 billion industry for a reason. I don't think that we're going to get rid of the messaging it's going to exist forever. The lose 20 pounds in whatever 6 weeks. I don't know what the promises are these days, but it's
I think
always
it's even
aggressive.
more. I think it's like higher. I think it's
Yeah,
like in
probably.
1.5 days.
Yeah, exactly. So like we're gonna do this tomorrow,
Mhm.
and I think that the advantage that we have is there is more access to education. There's more access to quality coaches. There's conversations like this that we get to put out into the
Mhm.
world, and
Yeah.
hopefully people listen to our podcasts. And I think that there's also the experience side of things where we can help people look at the things that you've tried in the past. I think that those quote unquote failures are such great opportunities to learn what did, and I used that. It was always going back and looking at, I don't regret any of the diets that I did in the past. They all taught me a valuable lesson
Yeah.
on what not to do, what didn't work for me, where I found my tendencies that were being exploited by
Mhm.
each of those protocols. And it helped me to understand like what really is the path that is the best fit for me. So it's
What do
not,
you know? What did you learn and what do you know? That's a great, I mean, I love that inventory, by the way, which is okay. Here are all the things I tried and here's how I did, but I don't do that last part, which is what do I know to be true from that, Nan? I get your pens out, folks. It's a great, humbling and wonderfully inquisitive information finding. I'm going to
yeah,
start doing it. I'll use you as my reference. That's a great activity.
yeah. So like understanding that meal plans didn't teach me anything other than, if you give me instructions, I can follow it to a T. And
Mm,
that sometimes leads me astray, because what if these aren't my instructions? Which
mm,
most of the time it's not. But like,
right.
what does my manual say? What does my instruction manual say? Just following something blindly didn't work for me. And then also understanding that by having that food list, that good list and that bad list, it
Yikes.
prevented me from exploring how different foods work with me in my own biology and my own psychology and all the things that make me unique. So I realize like I'm shutting off this whole world of food that is really beneficial because it was just this small list that I could follow.
Apples.
Apples. I love apples. I think I
Me and my
one
dog's favorite food.
have one every day. Um, so and then understanding that tracking calories and macros, I do have obsessive tendencies.
Hmm.
So I know that with something that's very rigid, if I don't have flexibility in my plan, if I don't have variety in my plan,
Mm.
like I like to try new things. I don't like the same repetitive stuff over and over again. So there was a lot of lessons that helped to mold
But
the way.
here's the problem with that. I'm so curious because I was just talking about this in my group today. We learn this stuff through trial and error,
Yeah.
and we have such a negative affiliation with error. So, how do you help your clients through that? Because what you're saying is it's right across the board. It's right when you're dating someone. Oh, what's my ideal? What am I looking for? It's right when you're finding a job. It's right in every relationship you have. But the way you actually find this stuff out, because I'm sure you also found that there were foods that absolutely didn't work for you. Maybe you even overate them. Maybe they triggered something inside of your mind. Like, how do you work with your clients on trial and error and learning about themselves? Because there's
Yeah,
inherent failure in that.
totally. I think the biggest thing, I've been fascinated with the language that we use and like the
Yes,
words
same,
that we
same.
use,
Mhm.
because failure has such a negative connotation, but it's such a gift if you change the definition and you redefine it and you reframe it. And I think that that's really what we try to instill in our clients, because there's one of my favorite stories, is there's this tribe in Namibia called the Himba tribe. They don't have a word in their language for the color blue,
Mm.
and there's no distinction between blue and green. So they don't have a word to define it. So it doesn't exist. Like they don't see, if you held up two circles, one was blue and one was green, they can't tell you the difference. They can't explain the difference. There's no word for it. It doesn't exist and they don't see it. And so I think about that and I'm like, all of these labels that we place on things, it's all made up.
It's
We
all an illusion.
It's all
Yeah.
made up. So we put these labels on things, and then and typically, that this would go down like a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's like we put labels on all these things that becomes like an us versus them thing, and people fight over labels, and my tribe is better than your tribe, or my political affiliation is better than yours, or my
Yeah.
religion is better than whatever it is. But taking
I mean,
it to
arguably, my intuitive eating is better than you watch. I mean, it's in our
exactly.
community, and one's, you
Yeah.
watching something is I only listen to what I want and I can eat what I want. I mean, the whole thing, absolutely. Putting meaning on all of this is really screwing us hard.
So it's like, what if we just defined failure differently? Like we
Mm.
actually can control how we define that and how we perceive it. And every, like, that belief, that feeling of like, oh well, I was a failure because of whatever, like your mindset in that moment is just a product of all of the inputs that have happened over the years that have
Mm.
led to this current feeling or belief. But you get to control what goes in. You get to control those inputs. We get to control the definition or the weight that we put on the words that we use and the language that we use. So what I try to do is help people redefine that. Like, what is failure? What does that
Mm.
actually mean? What does that
Yeah.
say about you? How
Yeah.
does that define you? And like we start to unpack it, and it was like, is there a different side of this story where that
Mm.
failure actually was the catalyst for you to seek out our coaching program, to make this transformation and to learn so much about yourself? Because if you didn't go through
Mm.
that, would you be here right now?
I mean,
Oh, so
preach.
let's redefine it. Let's just redefine what it means. Let's look at it as failure equals learning opportunity. Failure equals feedback. What if we just completely scrap the definition that it's a negative thing and we just completely flip it on its head?
Well, and there's a quote and it's like that, pain is the touchstone of all growth. I mean, that's just no one ever comes to you or me being like, "Hey, so life is amazing.
Yeah.
How are you?"
Yeah.
I read your email and I thought my relationship is wonderful. I just wanted to say hi. It's kind of the tragedy of our job in a way, huh?
Yeah.
Um, what I love this sentence that you said, I found myself a proper coach. Like, what does that mean? I'm so confused by coaching and I coach now. I'm so confused by it. Can you help us?
I would love to. I wish I could give like, these are the things that make an amazing coach, but
Well, when you say proper, I think it's actually, I'm really curious about that word. Like, how did you know that that was a different idea than the person that was in your gym or the nutrition company that you were working for? Like, what made you know that? How did you know it wasn't just going to be another scammo?
because I knew that it was for me. I knew that what we were talking about, it was about me. And it
Because he wasn't
wasn't
talking about food. You went to him for food
talking
and he
about,
stopped talking about food.
he wasn't talking about, hey, you're going to eat this and we're going
Right.
to have you doing this. It was about my life situation. It was
But did he talk to you about food? Because that would kind of piss me off.
if he did or did not.
If he did, I mean, it would piss me off if he didn't. It would piss me off if he didn't. But what I'm trying to say is, of course, I want to talk. But like, I also came there because I don't feel good in my body.
Yeah.
Like, was he addressing that as well?
So yeah, so we went through like my diet history, all of the past things that I've tried, why they didn't work. So I felt like he was really coming at it from an approach of I need to understand the unique dynamics of you as a person and the things that you want and what do you want to accomplish and why is this
Mm,
meaningful to you and what does
mm.
your life look like and what are and
That's so
talking about
validating. Like you really
that.
felt seen and
I,
heard by him.
I totally
Listen, that's a great one for everybody listening because we're going into vulture territory. We are going into vulture territory. Can you imagine? So if you're going to go try to find yourself a new coach, make sure that you feel seen and heard and understood in a very individualized way. That's what I'm hearing you say.
yeah. I love my favorite thing is when people reach out to me and they're like, do I have to insert
Right.
whatever thing on your program? They're like, do I have to fast on
Oh,
your
I
program? Do
hope our
I?
answer is the same. What's your answer? I love
I-
that question.
I'm always like, what program? There is
Oh,
no, I'm like, there's no program.
oh my
It's
God, that's
literally no
good.
for
Mine's
you.
like you don't have to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's
We're
like,
not adjudicated.
so I'm always like, what program are you talking about? They're like, well, I don't know. Like, and I'm like, you're so used to just being given
Yeah.
a set of rules and a template or a spreadsheet or a macro plan or a calorie plan or a
Oh,
point system. Like they're so hardwired into just thinking like person tells me what to do and I blindly follow it. Like that's not how this works.
well, it's not how it works permanently because you got to find your own way through it. You got to find what works for you. That's the only thing research says anyway.
Yeah. I'm like, hey, we're going to collaborate. You're going to
Mm.
be a part of the solution too. And we're
I
going to
mean, I want you to be
collaborate.
my coach and I don't even need a coach.
We're going to find this together. And that's how it should be.
But that's a great feeling, right? And I think the way you're saying it, at least as I'm hearing it, uh, is like it's very collaborative. So it's not there's no in DBT we have this thing like there's no white coat. Like you're there as the guide, you're the Sherpa. But if this person says, "Hey, I'm taking a left turn," you're gonna say, "Okay, we're gonna take a left turn. We might have to take a bunch of rights and get back here." But and I think that's the most important piece. I do think oftentimes people do this work very untreated and they do it from a real power play position.
Yeah.
And it ends up being them working out some of their trauma on you not doing what they want you to do.
Yeah. I think he said it well. The Sherpa or the guide. I like to call it the lighthouse. Like we're just
Mm,
shining light on the water.
that
You're
was my old
steering.
company. That's why I called my old company Beacon.
Oh, I love it.
And
Like
that's so
you're
samesies
steering
on
the
that.
ship. Like you're steering the ship. We're just illuminating the water for you.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, in all of this work, what do you think are the things that if you could just brainwash somebody? I know we're just talking about self-determination and we're talking about having people find their own way here for that. But if you just sometimes I'm like, if I got to decide one thing for you, this is what I would say. And by the way, it's like very rarely about food. What are the few things you just wish you could install in people that you're coaching to have them live a more fulfilled experience?
I think that everything starts with self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the
Mm-hmm.
one gift that I would love to give everyone is
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And you talked about it with my story of like, were you aware that you were miserable? And I really wasn't. And it
Right.
wasn't until hindsight was like, oh my God, a lot of people don't know how shitty they feel until they actually feel better.
Mm,
And you're like, if we could just create this awareness and this ultimate, it's hard to know yourself.
mm,
There's not like a blueprint. There's a lot of personal development stuff, and I think everybody would benefit from therapy and journaling and things like that. But just self awareness is such a gift. I
mm.
wish that I could spread that. And I think that unfortunately, we have a lot of limiting beliefs about ourselves, and I just most of the time, if we just first of all, if we were aware of those limiting beliefs, if we just took a second to write them down and to recognize that there's no evidence to support that, it
Right.
would give you so much freedom and just reminding people of who they are and what they're capable of and who they're meant to be.
Hmm. One that I would do, which I think is I really I don't know when I was on your podcast, we talked about this a lot, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. But like mine is, I would love to be able to just have people know that there's just not a short way to do this, because you have to do it forever. I know those are terrible words to say, but you're in a relationship with food for the rest of your life. So if we could just get rid of this whole quick fix stuff,
Yeah.
it's like it's all going to be peaceful. We can make it more peaceful for you. Is that
Yeah.
you experience, right? That's like
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked about that when I was. There's a great podcast you could listen if you're really into me and Mike. You could just be like, oh, I'm just going to go listen to Molly and Mike show. There's very different material there. It's a wonderful. They're wonderful together.
The feedback has been amazing, by the way. Everyone
Ugh,
loved
I mean,
that
I can't wait for the
conversation.
feed. I'm gonna publish this for next week. I love this one so much. Just FYI.
Yeah. So I think that you said it where it's like it's a big solution. It's not a short fix. And I was on a live training last night, and I asked a question about what people struggle with in playing the long game, because we were talking about the long game. And a lot of people were like, well, I have a hard time like getting back on track. That was like a common thing. Like I make this one mistake and I have a hard time getting back on track. And I was like, how many of you are parents? And everyone's like, me. And I'm like, have you ever had a day where you just kind of dropped the ball? You're like,
Yeah,
not my finest moment as a mom or a dad. And like everyone's like, yeah, of course, like
right.
happened earlier
Obviously,
today
right.
or yesterday or whatever. And I was like, did you think to yourself, you know what? This parenting thing is just not for me. I'm not going to get back on track. I'm just going to like say screw it and go off and
Just
not be a
give him
parent.
back. Just give
Like
him back.
just I quit. And
Yep.
they're like, no, of course not. So like you're going to be a parent for the rest of your life. Hopefully you have a very fulfilling relationship with your kids, but that's something that's a lifelong pursuit.
Mm,
And you have good days and you have bad days. And some days you feel like you're killing it. And some days you feel like you're just keeping your head above water. This is no different. You have to live in your body forever.
yeah.
Like let's embrace it the same way that we do any other lifelong pursuit. There's a lot of them out there. We have the ability, which I love about having kind of more of a growth mindset, is we can pull from other areas of our life and apply
Yeah.
it to our health. It's like you have other areas that's like you're playing the long game in certain ways. You could just borrow that mindset and carry it over.
I also feel like when you move into this, like maybe not fine, long game's great. So is like long-term relationship. Um, the parts of our brain that we need actually to make permanent change awaken. The thought I was having was actually about my own experience, shocking. But I was thinking about like when I really leaned into the idea that like eating a handful of almonds in the middle of a day wasn't a relapse and I didn't have to go try to kill myself with food after that. And that really helped me to say, it's not this one thing I'm doing. It's a comprehensive. And I remember the day where it started to occur to me to that maybe eating an organic fruit was better for me. I was never able to have that thought because I was like, weight loss and carbs and bad and your body. And I started to have this thought like, oh, it's grown in a way that's more nutritious for me. I swear I never thought about nutrition a minute in my life. And then that thought begot like, you know what? Maybe I want a foam roll because I want to age like all of these stuff. Like, and it's only calming down about that the end game, right? It's only when I started to calm down about the end game that I could start to have these truly loving thoughts. What do you think about that?
I think that if we get really comfortable and familiar with the future version of ourselves, we start to make decisions like that. We leave space to have thoughts like
Love that. Getting comfortable with, oh, that is a beautiful way to think about it. Comfortable with the future version of ourselves. Right.
we have this funny way of processing things with our brains where it's like, yeah, I know that I need to get like quality sleep. And then you're presented with this opportunity to like go get hammered with your friends. And
Right.
you're like, you know what? That's future Mike's problem. That's future Molly's problem. Like she's gonna
Right.
have to deal with that. I don't have to
I'll
deal
deal
with
with
it.
it later.
I
It's
have
not a
to
big
live it
deal.
up.
Mhm.
That's her
Right.
issue. And I think that if we actually start to get comfortable and familiar with that future version of ourselves, then we're like, I don't want to do that to them.
Yeah, you're
I
making
don't want to hurt
choices in
them that way.
service of them. That's exactly I was that's probably why I stopped. It was one of like 8,000 reasons I stopped drinking. Like I was like, I do not, this is not looking good. Like this is not hopeful. I'm obsessed with you even more than I was 2 days ago or last week. How can we know you? Tell us all the ways.
So
that my amazing community can know you. We want to know more about you.
I would say first that everybody should go listen to the interview we did on my show, which is
Pretty
called
good.
Mind Over Macros.
Isn't that the best title?
You can find that on any podcast platform. Anyone can connect with me on Instagram. My handle is at coach_Mike_Millner.
It's all in show notes, so don't stress.
Cool. And I also wrote a book called The Personality Diet, and really to help with understanding your individual needs as a person, that there is no one way of doing things. There's no cookie cutter approach that's going to work for you. And yeah, those are probably the best ways to connect.
Well, that's amazing. Do you have a website?
Yep. It's called neurotypetraining.com.
There you go. I'm going to go on. I haven't even been on that. I have so much more exploring to do. Can't wait. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we're friends.
Me too.
This is just the beginning. And see you soon, friend.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.